Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right here on Liberty Works Radio Network, where liberty works for you. So delighted that you are here again with me today, your host, Tom Navolis, as we continue to discuss many of what is happening, many of the issues on what is happening relative to truth, relative to what our founders' intent is and was. That's really interesting because this past week I've listened to all the various hubbub from President Trump making his announcement on the new pick for the Supreme Court to just tidbits of that debacle of a congressional hearing with the stroker, as I call him, and because he's stroking everything all over the place and making a mess out of it all, and Congress, anyway, we'll get into it here in a little bit, but last week and this week, I was going to chase down that road of the judiciary. But as I considered it more and more, I'll just kind of touch on it just a little bit today here in this first segment. But what I really want to get into is as we make progress towards the elections, what was it? What was going on? What did Sam Adams in particular have to say? And that tie-in and relationship that I wanted to bring in, and I talked about briefly last week. I actually put a picture up on Twitter that had Sam Adams and then a statement that he made back in 1797 as he was writing to the Massachusetts legislature. I only had room to put up a little bit of that information, but I want to go through that more extensively throughout the next two segments in particular. Talk about a letter that he did to James Warren and what it means to develop a candidate, what candidates are all about, what it means to actually give your vote, who should vote, who should not vote, and that we should have a means and method by which we ensure that only the right people are voting. The whole issue on the judiciary, just to take the few minutes in this segment, is that argument on the judiciary was very, very clear during Sam Adams' time frame, during the founding of this nation, in particular when it comes to the perversion of the law. And then, what was happening at that time? One of the things that Sam Adams has to say, he says, but were there no such laws of the providence, or should our enemies pervert these and other laws made for the same purpose, from their plan and obvious intent and meaning, still there is the great and perpetual law of self-preservation, to which every natural person or corporate body hath an inherent right to recur, this being the law of the Creator. No, no human law can be of force against it. And indeed, it is the absurdity to suppose that any such law could be made by common consent, which alone gives validity to human laws. If then the matter or thing, I love that matter or thing, that's always seems to have been a legal term. We heard that, from the Comey thing, the matter or the thing, but he has it in big quotes in his letter. The matter or the thing, viz., the fixing of salaries to the offices of the judges of the Superior Court, as aforesaid, was such as threaten the lives, liberties, and properties of the people, which we have the authority of the greatest assembly of the providence to affirm. The inhabitants of this or any other town had certainly an uncontrovertible right to meet together, either in a manner the law has prescribed, or in any other orderly manner, jointly to consult the necessary means of their own preservation and safety. What he was talking about was that what was happening in that whole period of the 1760s on, if you will, was that all of a sudden the king, through his actions, perverted and subverted the whole covenant that he had with the people. The whole idea of even jurisprudence within the colonies, instead of taking, and as it had historically been under the original charters, is that the judges were not only locally elected, but that the judges were, through taxation, local taxation, that they were then provided for through the assembly. So there was a definite push for the separation of powers that was always a part of the English Constitution. And that whole separation of powers was decided and defined in that the legislature, that being the body, and by charter, the local legislatures within the colonies had the capacity to raise taxes to support not only the governor, but the judges. But what happened was that the king came in and decided by acts of parliament and by the persuasion of parliament to take, and first off, the first what he did initially was to take the governorship and bring that totally and 100% financially, not just because the governor was always supposed to be that agent of the king, which was all perfect by charter as well as within the context of the loose English Constitution, as we've talked about it before, but in particular by charter, was that the governor was the representative of the king within the colony. Understood, no problem. But it was a responsibility by charter of the people of the colonies to pay the governor, to maintain his salary, to do that with, because he was performing that service. All fine and dandy. The people understood that. They accepted that. But when the king came in and said, no, from now on, what's going to happen is the governor is 100% mine. The governor is not only by charter my representative, but now I am going to take and 100% pay the salary of the governor except for his pension. His pension will still be on you, people of the colonies, and your taxes will continue to pay for his pension. Well, that was a rub. But what came next was even the greater rub, all except for the highest judge, who was always a part of the reporting to and even being paid by the crown. That was all part of the charter relationship. But the remainder of the court, as Adams was writing here, and the arguments that they had, and there were many, 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 many letters, and so many that I'd have to do a whole nother program on it, that go through appealing to the king that the courts, especially this court of the superior court, the judges of the superior court, were always paid by the people, never paid by the crown. So it became extremely interesting and very, very troublesome, because now, instead of taking and being a judiciary that was separated in power, if you will, separated in the idea of judgment, now the whole question was, would all of the judges and justices that sat on the courts be 100% beholden to the king, because the king was taking and doing what? Paying their salary. Well, of course, that was exactly the great fear. That was the problem that the people saw now throughout all the colonies of this issue. Even to the extent then that not only did Sam Adams and the people come together in correspondence and appeal to the king numerous times. But as Benjamin Franklin was then taken and he was elected as the agent to the Court of England, that a letter was written to him as well and saying, dear Mr. Franklin, this is what's going on. And we have written these letters. And not only that, what we have found out is that the king and those within Parliament are not willing to step back and away from that. And yet, the appeal that we have and the desire that we have to take and have a free and independent judiciary is now subverted. Now, what laws and how will those laws be perverted? So what we see is ideology, ladies and gentlemen. And what I want to wrap up as we get into the last few minutes of this segment is that what we have already seen as of Monday evening, before the announcement was ever made, that the ideologies of those who would pervert the law, who would pervert the Constitution, have done it and have continued and desire to continue to do so. What we see is that they were ready and prepared to what? Protest loudly, make noise. I mean, indistinguishable chatter, if you will. I saw some of that as it was live on Monday night, and I'm going, that once again, that reminds me of some statement that I made. I can't remember where I made it, but the statement that I made is that it sounded like the confusions of hell. And quite frankly, when we look at everything from that whole perspective, and what Sam Adams was writing here, also that, it all comes down to you can't subvert the laws of God. That there was an inherent rights that we have. I know a lot of people debate this whole idea of what is natural right, natural law, and all of that. But the bottom line is that everything is the Creator's. All good law, all righteous law comes from God. And the only way to know that and to make sure that there is justice is that we understand it from God's perspective. Now, when I heard all of this noise that was being chattered in front of the Supreme Court, it was just amazing to me. And you had your normal ideological individuals there, the Warrens, and the Sanders, and who are those that have ideologies that are pure Marxist, neo-Marxist at, we can say some best, or socialist. But the reality is that is exactly what happens when you have the chatter of evil that wants to be subversive, when they want to take and undermine for the purposes of ideology, not the purposes of justice, not the purposes of righteousness. So that's what you hear. And I got to tell you, you know what? I sure look at it from Jesus's comment that, hell is going to be about, the gnashing of teeth, because, in effect, that's what was going on out there. There was all this screaming, this moaning, this gnashing of teeth. So I'm going, wow, that's, the human representation of, hell on earth, or hell in front of the Supreme Court. And to the extent that they would threaten a news reporter in doing her job and just reporting the news as she has done many, many times. Well, that's Marxism, absolutely. And it's also the plan of the evil, as I always talk about, is go research. I'm not going to put it up because it's up on a number of my other programs, is the Kozak plan with pressure from above and pressure from below. So when you have representatives there in that chatter and all these people running around, promoting their ideology, what you have is exactly what the Kozak plan is and how the Marxists did take over Czechoslovakia. So you need to go think about that. And what you need to do is you need to go listen, I think, to Laura Ingraham and her reporting on this new potential justice. So come on back in the next segment when Sam Adams returns to talk about what it means to give your vote. here on Liberty Works Radio Network. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to the second segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those Anti-Federalists, yes, they did. They absolutely got it right. And we are on Liberty Works Radio Network. And this is Tom Navolis, your host. And please, I do implore you, as I do always in this segment, is that it's important that you go check out the rest of the programming on Liberty Works Radio Network and that you support the activity of this network. This has really been a super network. They really do a great job. There's a lot that's going on in the Maryland markets, and as it goes into Tennessee and some of the other markets that are out there that the programming reaches to, please check out weekly, especially those folks in the Maryland market, those live programming that is particular to you, as well as there's other live programming that is generalized around constitutional issues and some discussions in those areas. So, again, just great encouragement. I also would encourage you to go look at the archives of these programs, my program, Sam Adams Returns, the Anti-Federalists Got It Right, on samueladamsreturns.net. And there, not only will you be able to listen, you'll be able to see the YouTube archive, and you'll be able to take a look and buy my books, and it'll take you to the link to the samueladamsreturns.com website, where you can schedule up and ask more questions about me coming out and speaking, either as Sam Adams or in getting signed up for seminars or requesting the seminar on the new book, From Covenant to the Present Constitution. Now, with all of that, Sam Adams, he was writing to the legislature in Massachusetts in 1797 about the elections that just occurred at that period of time. And as you well know, many of you, that I'm getting off of Facebook as of by the end of August. Okay, I just think with all the moves that they're doing, that it's time to vote with our dollar and all of that, as I talked about last week. So I am going Eagle Fire Post. But on Twitter, I did keep up and post an article up on Twitter, and not an article, but a little picture, as I mentioned in the first segment. And I could only put up a little bit of what I'm going to read to you from this letter at the moment. Sam Adams, he was writing to the legislature in 1797, and there was a lot more previous to this portion of it, but he goes on in that letter to say, in pursuance of the provision in the Constitution, the people have recently exercised their own sovereign power in the election of another president. So this was for a new president in 1797. Elections to offices, even in the smallest corporations, are and ought to be deemed highly important. I've covered this paragraph with you before, but it's incumbent upon us to review it again with all of the immigration insanity that continues and the fact that we are now pushing through and into this midterm election period. So he continues that not only is every office, but even in the smallest corporations. All right, so that's in businesses, that's in cities, that's in townships, that's whatever is incorporated, are and ought to be deemed highly important. Of how much more importance is it that elections to the highest offices in our extensive republic, not democracy, a republic, should be conducted in a manner and with a spirit becoming a free, virtuous, and enlightened people who justly estimate the value of their sacred rights. Okay, so that's important. Get that. We need to be we are free, a virtuous, and enlightened. Well, I know we're not a virtuous nation anymore and barely enlightened, even though we have all the pundits that are out there. So he goes on to say, the people have turned their attention to several citizens who have rendered eminent services to our federal commonwealth in exalted stations, upon which ever of the candidates the lot may have fallen, the people have reason to expect that his administration will be strictly conformable, get it? Strictly conformable to the letter and true intent of the Constitution. Whoa, stop right there. Okay? So this blows away all the insanities of the various ideologies that, just continue out there. All of that which was in front of the Supreme Court, all of these neo-Marxists that are in the Democrat Party, they are liars, deceivers, and subverters of what I just read. And I'm going to read it again because of the subversion that is going on out there and being propagated in education, which I'll talk about in a moment. You see, he says, on what? That you gave your vote. And when you vote, you expect what? That the candidates, the lot may have fallen. On those candidates that the lot may have fallen, one of the things that he does know for sure is that, yes, when you give your vote, ultimately, the lot was always referred to in a reference to that God is ultimately in control on how that vote goes, who are the people that will vote. And I'm not going to get into the whole theology of it. That's many, many other conversations down the road. Eventually, I'm going to have to put my theological hat on because I'm seeing so much that's out there from a lot of lead pastors that is just, blown my mind. Anyway, that's why we have the problems we have. So he goes on that the people have reason to expect. You have the reason to expect that his administration will be strictly conformable to the letter and true intent of the Constitution. So that means when you pick a Supreme Court justice, that they should be what? They should be strictly conformable to the letter and true intent of the Constitution, not ideologues of neo-Marxism or Marxism or whatever else you want to call the left agenda. So he continues that it may long continue to be the guarantee of our freely elective Republican government. Whoa, right there. So the only way that we can guarantee our Republican government is by doing what? Strictly an administration that is strictly conformable to the letter and true intent of the Constitution. That's it. Okay? So that's why, anyway, we can talk about past administrations to which they have not been, and to which I believe, I can't say what percentage, but I know that Donald Trump is really making an effort, even though he's not a constitutionalist. He knows more about it from his American DNA than all of the swamp put together. Wow. Anyway, Sam Adams goes on to say, unfair and uncontrolled elections depend, under God, the whole superstructure of our government. So we have to have these fair and uncontrolled elections, okay? And he says that it has to be under God, and that it's the superstructure of our government. Should corruption ever insert itself in our elections, there would be great danger of corruption in our governments. Really? Go think. See what's happening right now in the local level, at the state level. Oh my goodness gracious, at the federal level. So the whole Democrat Party, maybe some that are just being beaten down, but the corruption that's there is because of the corruption of those that are elected. Although it is not long since the subject of elections was under the consideration of the legislature, and a law passed for the purpose of further security to the people in the free exercise of this invaluable right, yet give me leave to suggest for your consideration. All right? In these last few minutes that we have here, for your consideration, that, what do we need to take a look at? Let me find my spot here. It is invaluable. Let me suggest for your consideration whether still further securities may not be provided. So he's talking about there's been some changes in election law, but you know what? We need to have some further securities with that. So what he's saying here is that in these further securities, so that the rightful electors may not be frustrated in their honest intentions. That's why we have a lot of apathy. That's why we don't get a lot of people out to vote, because we have had such perversion in our election process. That the elections may not be contaminated by strangers. Oh my goodness. What do we have going on? What is it that the Democrats, the Democrats, want to do except use strangers to vote? We see that in this whole voter motor insanity in the left coast, and even in New York and a bunch of other places. You know what? That is strangers. And what happens? You're frustrated with it, so that the elections may not be contaminated by strangers or unqualified persons. May it not be necessary that every man may be known. That's like, you have some ID. As far as possible, when he presents himself to give his vote, this may be more especially important in our seaports and other populous towns in which many foreigners of all sorts frequently reside. And he was talking about legal foreigners, okay, legal people, not the illegals. But even with that, he was talking about, wow, let's not see our elections perverted by all these different people. I would be he goes on, I would be far from dictating to you, but I would submit to your judgment whether, considering the liberality of this country to foreigners, he was talking about that right there with legal people, liberality in our country. Yes, has been. And the frequency of their naturalization, we have them being naturalized, it may not be eligible that such foreigners should be required, when they offer their votes to the selectmen of the towns, to produce authentic certificates from the courts by which they were endowed with so high a privilege as a test of their citizenship. Ladies and gentlemen, he's driving to this whole point, and we're going to get back to it as we get more into the next segment. But he's driving to the point that we have so many foreigners, and we have to be cautious. And illegals in particular have no right to vote whatsoever because of the high privilege that it is to vote. Citizens take it for such granted. But yet, as we know, the frustrations of so many that do not vote. I know in my county that they got a whole bunch of the Democrats off their dead butts to come vote for one person and cross over from Democrats to Republicans. So is that not frustrating the vote? Is that not alone taking and being destructive in everything that he's talking about of, in a fair election process? Wow. Even with legal elections, there becomes perversion within the context of it when a party pushes an ideology or pushes its intent for an evil outcome, or to get in a person that really is not qualified to take and sit in a seat. We're going to talk about some of that qualification when we offer our suffrage, as it's called. We have to suffer through that process of who to elect. What does that really mean? What does it mean to have a moral and a virtuous, qualified person for the job that is going to sit in that seat of representation and be able to carry it out according to the purposes of its design? Well, come on back in the next segment of Samuel Adams Returns, and we'll talk about that. What does it mean to offer your suffrage in elections? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this last segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they got it right here on Liberty Works Radio Network. As yes, always, liberty does work when you understand what it was and what we understand as founders' original intent. And that's what I've been talking about in elections in particular. Sam Adams talked about that. He talked about it in his letter to the legislature. What does it mean to vote? And what should you expect from an administration? And you should expect from those that you elect, and especially in the administration of a president, is what he said here, strictly conformable to the letter and true intent of the Constitution. What is that? Where does that come from? He also was talking about fair and uncontrolled elections. What does that mean? And he also makes that whole commentary, as I did in the last segment, and refreshing with you, is that what he talks about is a recommendation that you don't let foreigners vote. You don't let illegals vote. And even with the new people, you know what? There's so many new folks. It's not just your driver's license that gives you a right to vote. No, you need to show your citizenship, especially with those that are new citizens. Yeah, I believe in it. Sam Adams suggested it. Why? Why? To keep everybody from being frustrated, to take and ensure that our votes matter and that we are not having perversions and corruption in our election process. One of the things that he continues on with, and as he was talking about that the foreigners that are frequently naturalized, it may not be eligible, that such foreigners should be required when they offer their votes to the selectmen of the towns to produce authentic certificates of the courts by which they were endowed with so high a privilege as a test of their citizenship. Yeah, okay. Now he goes on in that same paragraph to say, as piety, religion, and morality have a happy influence on the minds of men in their public as well as their private transactions, you will not think it unseasonable, you will not think it unseasonable, although I have frequently done it, to bring to your remembrance the great importance of encouraging our university, town schools, and other seminaries of education that our children and youth, while they are engaged in the pursuit of useful science, may have their minds impressed with the strong sense of the duties they owe to their God, their instructors, and each other, so that when they arrive to the state of manhood and take a part in any public transaction, their hearts having been deeply impressed in the course of their education with the moral feelings, such feelings may continue and have their due weight through their whole lives and their future lives. He ties these two together. He ties piety, religion, morality, and being in that influence of mind, because then when you go to vote, you have that as part of who you are. And your expectation is that those who you go to elect will have the same thing. And those that who will run for office will be people who are developed and matured in what? They're matured in their public and private what? Piety, religion, and morality. You know, if that's part of who you are, those are the fundamental standards by which this nation was developed. Where's the piety, religion, and morality in schools now? Where did he say you need to have that? It wasn't just at home. It wasn't just at your church, which a lot of churches don't even teach that anymore as well, I'll tell you that. Or if they give it from saying that the Bible says it, They don't give you the practical application as to how do you get there. I mean, it's in the scriptures. You can go read Romans, you can go read Corinthians, you can read all that Paul teaches and get a clear understanding that it's only by the Holy Spirit that you can even get to these, by having that relationship and understanding that example of Jesus Christ. Can you even understand what piety is and what good religion is, or what morality is, and how that becomes a part of your life? I mean, I was just reading Romans 8 again this morning, and without the Holy Spirit, it's just impossible to overcome our humanness, our human nature, if you want to call it that way, our sinful nature. But you know what? If it's not brought to your mind, you're just not going to get it. If it's not brought to you by the Holy Spirit because you have a relationship with the living God, you're just not going to get it. And if our universities are perverse with all of the crazy things that are required courses and humanistic studies and all of these other crazy forms of study that do not teach piety and morality and are so disconnected from the Christian religion, but are 100% connected to the humanism of Marxism, well, what do you want? You get what you have. So he says, encouraging our university, town schools, and other seminaries of education that our children and youth, while they are engaged in the pursuit of useful science, even science, useful science, may have their minds impressed with the strong sense of the duties they owe to their God, their instructors, and each other. We don't have that. We don't have that in any of our schools, our universities, town schools, and seminaries. Seminaries. Really? You got to remember that Harvard was not just the university, but Harvard was a seminary. Sam Adams initially went to Harvard to become a minister, but as I tell you, he really fell in love not only with the living God, but into what it meant to study history and come to that great understanding of good governance, and that all government and governance comes from God. So as he talks about here, and we want to continue on in a letter to James Warren back in 1780, he was talking about it. It ill becomes you, my friend, to think that, of retiring into private life. Who can lay your hand on your heart and say that in your public conduct you have in no instance deviated from virtuous principles? Holy smokes, what a powerful thing to be able to say to a friend. If ever the time should come when vain and aspiring men shall possess the highest seats in government, our country will stand in need of its experienced patriots to prevent its ruin. Wow. I'd sure like to know where are other than vain and aspiring men and women all elected into government. And where are the experienced patriots? We haven't raised any up in a long, long time. Not true experienced patriots who are what? Have piety, virtue, morality. Oh my goodness, where is that? Let's see, he goes on to say that, we need these patriots to prevent its ruin. Well, the country's in ruin because we don't have those patriots. There may be more danger of this than some, even of our well-disposed citizens, may imagine. If the people should grant their suffrages to men only because they conceive them to have been friends to the country, without regard to the necessary qualifications for the places they are to fill, the administration of government will become a mere farce. Of our public affairs will never be put on the footing of solid security. You getting that? It's a farce. That's what we have. We have a farce in so many ways. We should inquire into the temperance of men in order to form a judgment in what manner the public trust to be responded in them or reposed in them will be executed. You remember the character of Pistrasus. He was a citizen of Athens, supposed to have many excellent qualities, but he had an insatiable lust of preeminence. Solon could discover his vanity, but the people were blinded by a false glare of virtues, and he was their idol. Under pretense of having escaped imminent danger from a violent faction and further insecurity of his person, he artfully obtained a guard of soldiers, by which means he possessed himself of the citadel and usurped the government. But though he made himself sovereign and thus far overthrew the popular election, the historian tells us that he made no changes in the magistry of the laws. He was content that others should hold their places according to the established rules of the Constitution, so that he might continue archon, independent of the suffrages of the people. This he effected through the several attempts were made to deprive him of the sovereignty which he had so violently obtained. He held it till his death and left it to his children. Such was the ambition of this man, who indeed assumed the government, and such were the effects of it. Power is intoxicating, and men legally vested with it too often discover a disposition to make an ill use of it and an unwillingness to part with it. Wow. I have to stop there and just kind of do a summation of what has happened with that whole issue of power. And not just in the ones that we have elected. I mean, so you got Obama taking and trumping around because it's all in his head. He was an egotist all along, got elected. And you know what? He can't live without that power. And there's so many that cannot live without power. There's so many in the bureaucracies. And this is the other things that when we talk about first principles, instead of all the talking heads talking about just their blabber mouthing, we should drive back to what are the first principles of governance so that we, the people, have that great capacity. And I will accept, Mark Levin, he does a great job of getting back to first principles. But the bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, is that you have the Strokes, you have all of the other people associated with him, you have the top level bureaucrats who have taken oaths to the Constitution with the expectation that the administrations would be carried out in what? You know what? Go back and look at it again. We expect that our Constitution would be held from its point of intent. So we need justices that will do that, not ideologues. And the same thing that goes for the bureaucrats. The bureaucrats should be those that will uphold the Constitution that they took an oath to instead of implementing their ideologies. We see this in the EPA. We see this in so many of the other departments that are out there. State Department for over 100 years has been running on the socialist neo-Marxist ideology deep in foggy bottom. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we do have those problems today. And it goes all the way back to what Sam Adams talks about, and he does talk about specifically the Christian religion. And what we need is our pulpits to really talk not just about the truth from that biblical perspective, but also, ladies and gentlemen, what does it mean that we have these fundamental truths that have to be incorporated for good governance? How does that work? That's what we talk about on this program. That's what I talk about with Samuel Adams. That's what we talk about in the seminar, From Covenant to the Present Constitution. We need to have those fundamentals so that we understand original intent, truth, and original intent so that we can have good governance and expect that in those that we elect to office, and we can vet them accordingly. So come on back next week to Samuel Adams Returns, because those anti-federalists, they got it absolutely right.